Even if you've been feeling lonely lately, you may have never stopped to think about the true cause of this feeling or a practical way to overcome it. Well, the psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Robert Waldinger has some thoughts on this topic that might change your perspective and give you a realistic strategy for minimizing feelings of loneliness in your daily life. So let's hear what he has to say.
I can deliberately isolate myself and feel great about that. But only you can tell if you're lonely. And the fact is, you can be lonely in a crowd, you can be lonely in a marriage. You can also be very content and not lonely alone on a mountaintop. Starting in the 1950s and going all the way through to today, we know that people have been less and less invested in other people. In some studies, as many as 60% of people will say that they feel lonely much of the time. And the lowest estimates are 30 to 40% of people say they feel lonely. Young adults, age 16 to 24, are the loneliest age group. And then again, among older adults, there is an increase in loneliness, particularly as people lose friends, lose partners. But loneliness is pervasive across the world, across all age groups, all income groups, all demographics.
All right, so again, that's Robert Waldinger, the psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, talking about the fact that modern loneliness is something that's very pervasive. It's found across all socioeconomic classes, and he's really highlighting the difference between being alone and being lonely, right? Like you could go hiking by yourself, reach the top of a mountain and feel completely content, feel like nothing or no one is missing. You just feel fine by yourself. But you can also be surrounded by people at a bar or a party or in school or even at home and feel empty or completely alone, even though there are people in your presence. And like I just said, this has been true for people of all socioeconomic classes, according to Robert, since the 1950s. And so he's going to go into more detail about that right now. Let's check it out.
There are so many factors that are responsible for this loneliness epidemic. They did not just begin with the digital revolution. Loneliness was on the rise, as we know, at least from the 1950s. In part because of social dislocation, we've become a much more mobile society where the networks of family and friends get disrupted as people move for jobs and other kinds of opportunities like education. All of that is good on the one hand, but that it tears us away from the fabric of belonging that many of us are born into and spend much of our lives creating. Then there is the world of screens. So when television came into the American home, there was a decline in investing in our communities. People went out less, they joined clubs less often, they went to houses of worship less often, they invited people over less often. All of that seems to contribute to our increasing disconnection and our increasing levels of loneliness. That was made worse as the digital revolution gave us more and more screens to look at and software that was designed specifically to grab our attention, hold our attention, and therefore keep it away from the people we care about.
All right, so in part two of this clip, Robert is talking about the fact that, contrary to popular belief, the loneliness epidemic, if we can call it that, really started back in the 50s, back when, at least in the US, a lot of people started to move specifically for work. That started to happen much more frequently. For example, in my family, we moved around a lot when I was a kid because my dad was always going after better, higher paying jobs, and they just happened to be in different locations. And that was the case for a lot of people, whether they came from a military family or their parents were moving for some other type of profession or whatever it may be. People started moving for work a lot more frequently, which took them away from their community, their neighborhood, other family members that live in the same city, their school friends, colleagues at work, things of that nature. So if you're constantly moving from place to place, you're basically uprooting yourself and your life and having to start over in a new place, which can be very challenging. And then things like the television came along, which caused people to just leave the house a lot less frequently. Instead of going out to do things, you sit at home and you look at the TV. And then smartphones came along, and it was just like the TV on steroids, where now we don't all have to watch the same thing on one TV. We all have these miniature TVs in our pockets that will play podcasts and TikTok videos and YouTube videos and Instagram and etc. And so the technology that we know and love today only made things worse. It's not the root cause of everyone feeling so lonely. According to Robert, it started much before that. So let's hear what else he has to say.
We know that people with strong social bonds are much less likely to die in any given year than people without strong social bonds. There's good work by Julianne Holt-Lundstad, who is a researcher who studies loneliness. And what she finds is that loneliness is as dangerous to our health as smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day. We think that stress is one of the main causes of physical health breakdown that comes from loneliness. But there are probably other causes as well. And in addition, the research shows that people who are lonely in late life have more rapid brain decline. So we know that this same process of increased stress or decreased stress affects how our brains age. And many other studies show that the single choice we can make that's most likely to keep us on a good path of well-being is to invest in our relationships with other people. It's not just our closest relationships that make us feel connected. It's all kinds of relationships. It's the person who delivers the mail. It's the cashier who checks us out at the grocery store. It's all these casual encounters. All of these ways of making it a little bit more personal do a lot to make other people feel like they belong, and they make us feel more like we belong.
All right. So in this part of the clip, Robert is talking about the effect that this loneliness epidemic is having on so many people. They found, let's say that apparently some scientists found that people who experience large amounts of loneliness, people who spend tons of time alone, their brains tend to, I don't want to use the word deteriorate. What was the word that he used? Rapid brain decline or something like that. He said, we think that stress is one of the main causes of physical health breakdown that comes from loneliness, but there are probably other causes as well. In addition, people who are lonely in late life or later in life, in their older years, 60, 70, 80, 90, they have more rapid brain decline. That's what he said. So just being lonely apparently causes so much stress that it causes your physical and mental health to decline, especially later in life. And I guess some studies even found that loneliness is just as dangerous or harmful as smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day, which is hard to believe. But if that's true, that's an insane fact, you know? And so he ends this part of the clip by saying one simple thing we can do to overcome this modern problem is investing more in our relationships like we used to before, let's say, the 50s. Go back to a lifestyle and a tradition that was much more like the 40s and any time before that. You get what I'm trying to say, right? Invest more in people so that they feel connected to us and that we feel connected to them. And that word connected is really important. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But there's one more part of this clip that I'm going to play before I get to that. So let's check it out.
Many people who are lonely feel that others don't want to be with them. And what we know is that lonely people can sometimes give off the message that they don't want to be approached because they're afraid of others. They're afraid of the world. And so it may be that lonely people can learn more about making gestures and giving off signals that say, I would like to connect, even when they're a little bit afraid to do so. And so they've actually developed forms of cognitive behavior therapy where people are taught these social skills and taught how to revise their assumptions about not being wanted by other people. My recommendation, if you're feeling lonely and a little bit afraid, is find a setting, find an activity around other people where you are comfortable and see what develops. You belong, you matter, you're connected.
All right, so let me summarize that last part of this clip. Robert is talking about the fact that a lot of people who are often very lonely, very isolated, whether they know it or not, they often give off the signal or the impression that they don't want to be approached by other people. They don't want anybody to walk up to them and say hello. They're not interested in making friends. They don't want to find a partner. Just leave me the fuck alone is often what a lot of lonely people will communicate non-verbally. And a lot of us don't even realize that. It's the look on our face, it's our body language, our energy when we walk into a room, the eye contact that we make with other people, our smile. It's a bunch of little non-verbal details that will often communicate to somebody whether or not we're open to being approached, making friends, having a conversation. And as a lonely person, as a more introverted person, as a more isolated person, you may have never even considered that, you know? And he mentioned something really important, which is a lot of lonely people will often make the assumption that other people aren't interested in talking to them. They'll make the assumption that they're not wanted, they're not interesting, they're not attractive, they're not funny, they're not whatever. Whatever they need to be charismatic and socially adept, they're missing that, you know, and they make that assumption about themselves. They make the assumption that other people are going to see them the way they see themselves, right? And you may have never even considered that. You may be walking around thinking, why is it so hard to talk to people? Why is it so hard to make friends? Why is it so hard to meet people? And you don't even realize that you are starting on the wrong foot because you're not communicating that you actually want to talk to people, make friends, and be social. And that's why I wanted to share this clip with you today, because it really is something that, like, well, I've said it a couple times, you may have just never stopped to consider that it's not even what you're saying or not saying. It's just what you're communicating non-verbally, you know? That's fascinating to me. But at this point in the podcast, I want to talk about the main takeaways, the things I really want you to consider after listening to this episode. The first one is the difference between being alone and being lonely. Because like Robert said in the clip, you could go hiking by yourself, reach the top of a mountain, and feel amazing. Your head is clear. There's no distractions, nobody to perform for, nobody to entertain or think about. It's just you, and you're connected with nature, listening to the birds, breathing in the fresh air, looking at the clouds. It just, you feel at peace, right? Pure serenity. And you don't necessarily feel that somebody's missing. You don't feel that somebody else should be there. It's just you, and you feel amazing. You are alone. You're alone, but you don't feel lonely because you're connected with nature. You're connected with yourself, which are really one and the same. And on the other hand, you could go to a bar. This actually happened to me just last weekend. I went out with some drinking buddies. Well, I went out with a drinking buddy who invited other friends. So it was me, him, his girlfriend, one of his employees, and then like 3 other friends. And to make a long story short, it was like 4 different nationalities, 3 different languages being spoken. English was the one that was spoken the least, unfortunately. So I just found myself having a hard time connecting to these strangers. Social interaction, especially in groups, has always been tough for me. But particularly that night, there just came this point in the evening. We had been at the bar for a couple hours, drinking, smoking, talking or whatever, just bullshitting, having a good time. And there came this point in the evening, probably like 2 hours in, I just found myself like my social battery was getting lower and lower. And I'm just like, I just don't have a connection with any of these people. I don't know what to say or talk about. They barely speak English. They're speaking Thai and Mandarin to each other. I'm trying to follow along. It just, you know, all these different factors led to me feeling like disengaged, disconnected. And there was this moment when I just looked around and literally everyone was on their phone. It was me and 6 other people, 2 to my right, 3 across from me, and then 1 on my left. If you're watching this, you know I got that mixed up. Left, right, whatever. I'm surrounded by 6 other people, and literally every one of them is on their phone. My homeboy to my left is on his phone. His girlfriend is to his left. She's on her phone. Across from us is another couple, both on their phones. One of their friends on his phone, and the guy to my right on his phone. I'm just sitting there looking at him like, the fuck am I doing here? You know what I'm saying? I just felt disconnected from the people I was with, and therefore lonely. And that's really what it's about. I think that after listening to this clip and thinking about past experiences, the feeling of loneliness comes from feeling disconnected to whoever you're with or whatever you're doing, which is why sometimes you can be surrounded by people and feel alone. And other times you can be alone and be completely content because of what you're doing in that moment. Like if you play football, for example, you know it's a team sport. It's best when you have friends to play with. But you could just go to the park by yourself with a ball and not feel lonely, feel completely engaged with the activity itself and have the time of your life. I do it all the time. I'm alone, but I don't feel lonely. But you can go to a bar and there's 8 other people, but you don't feel connected to any of them. You're not really engaged with any of them and you just feel alone. And that's true for any situation or any activity. It's not the number of people involved, it's the connection to those people. It's not the activity itself, but your connection to that activity, which is why you find certain things boring and other things interesting. When you're doing something you find interesting or engaging, you don't really feel time passing. You don't wish somebody else was here. You're just engaged. You're immersed in that thing. Or when you're with your favorite people, even if it's just one person, you're not like, damn, I wish more people were here. Or I wish we were doing something else. Sometimes it doesn't even matter what you're doing. It's just as long as you're with this particular person, it's okay because of the connection you have to that person. So I think that is really the difference between being alone and feeling lonely, or what determines whether you feel alone and or lonely. It's your connection to the people around you or the activity that you're doing. That's what I think. And another thing I want y'all to consider is casual encounters and how the simplest of actions and or interactions can make all the difference. And when I started to think about this takeaway, it made me think of Charlie Hubert, which is, I guess, the co-creator of the YouTube channel Charisma on Command, which I highly recommend, by the way, because one thing he talks about sometimes in his videos, and just in case you don't know, Charisma on Command is a YouTube channel all about social skills. So if you're socially inept, you feel like you're socially awkward, a bit anxious, you never really learned the game that is social interaction, the YouTube channel Charisma on Command is a great free resource for getting started down the path of learning how to be more charismatic, learning how to feel comfortable in social situations, gain confidence. You know what I mean? And one thing that Charlie Hubert talks about in his videos is the idea that when it comes to being charismatic, a lot of people think that it's something that they can turn on and off like a light switch or a cell phone, right? A lot of people think they can go through life just isolated and not talking to anyone, not engaging with anyone. And then they see a girl that they want to talk to, they find attractive, and they think I can just turn on my charisma, go over there, charm this woman, get her number, and blah, blah, blah. When it doesn't really work like that. You're most likely going to see that attractive woman and then get nervous and be thinking, what should I say? What should I do? Because you're not in the habit of just approaching people that you find attractive, or just approaching people in general. And that's really what he talks about. He's saying if you want to be a more charismatic individual, if you want to get better at talking to people so that when you finally do come across somebody you want to talk to, you have the social skills necessary to engage with that person, then you got to get in the habit of just talking to people, not just flirting with people that you're romantically interested in or sexually attracted to. Just flirt with everyone. The cashier, the bus driver, the taxi driver, your teachers, people waiting in line. No matter where it is, no matter who it is, just get in the habit of starting conversations, being playful, experimenting with different things that you can say to get reactions out of people, seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work, learning how to read nonverbal communication, learning how to read people's facial expressions. That takes practice because it is a skill. So he talks about that in his videos. You got to just get in the habit of talking to people. So when you finally come across somebody you want to talk to, it'll be like tying your shoes. You've done it so many times, you don't have to think about it. And so outside of the context of romance, just generally in life, it's the same thing. If you know you're feeling lonely or awkward or anxious in social situations, but you want to talk to more people, you want to make more friends, you want to have more positive interactions and engage more with people, you just got to get in the habit of talking to people, starting conversations with anyone, practicing the stuff I talk about on the podcast, not just listening to the podcast and then saying, oh, that's a good idea, but actually putting it into practice in your daily life, no matter what language you're speaking. Because you might live in a country where most people don't speak English and you still want to practice English. That's fine. You can still practice your communication skills because communications come before language. You see what I'm saying? Language goes on top of that. So even if you're just working on communication skills in your native language, it's going to transfer to any other language that you speak, you know? Or you might just be in a country or a culture where like talking to strangers isn't normal. People will probably think you're a bit weird, a bit strange. They might feel defensive or like who the fuck are you? What do you want? Right? In some places, it's not normal. But what I will say is sometimes being normal isn't the most important thing. Because this is the thing. If you're one of those people that's lonely and you live in a culture where it's not normal to approach strangers to try to make friends as adults, you have to stop and ask yourself, you really think you're the only person that wishes they could be more outgoing and make more friends or find a partner? In your entire city or country, you think you're the only person that thinks and feels that way? Of course not. Of course you're not. And so maybe, just maybe, you can be one of the people that has the balls or the ovaries to go out and approach people, start conversations, even if you get rejected time after time after time, even if people think you're weird. So what? I mean, what other option do you have for meeting new people? If you don't talk to people, how do you expect to meet them? You know? So what I'm saying is a simple way to get into that situation, a simple gateway to more conversations and connections is just by getting in the habit of speaking to people casually. Hey, how you doing? Good morning. Giving people genuine compliments like I talked about in a recent episode. Simple, small things that are easy to do can really lead you into deeper, more meaningful interactions with people. It all starts with hello, or excuse me, can you help me with this? Or oh my God, I love your outfit, or whatever. It's simple stuff that leads to what you really want, which is more engagement, more interactions, more connections, right? So that's just something to think about. And another thing to think about, something that's really important for a lot of people to understand, is the importance of relationships and the effect they have on your mental health. And this makes me think about just last week when I was at the bar, like I was telling you about. I was talking to my homie's girlfriend, and she was asking me what kind of girls I like. Because I asked her if she had any single friends, right? I want a Thai girlfriend and I can like practice my Thai that way. It's a win-win, right? And so she was asking me, well, what kind of girls do you like? And if I tried to respond in English, I knew she wouldn't really understand because her English is quite basic. And my Thai is even worse. So I didn't have the words in Thai to answer her question. So the only word that came to mind that I knew she would understand was introvert. So I said I like introverted women and women who like to have conversations that we can actually talk about just anything and everything and nothing. You know what I mean? I like talking, making conversation. And she said, well, introverts don't like talking to people. Introverts don't like making conversation. And I said, actually, we do. It's just we don't necessarily like talking to a lot of people at one time. We like having conversations under different circumstances, right? Like if it's just me and you, or me, you, and one other person, that's very different from us and like 6 or 8 or 9 other people. Because in a group setting, the dynamic is just different, you know? And I won't even get into that. But my point is, I told her, introverts love talking to people. We love making conversation just like anybody else, just in a different way or maybe under different circumstances. And I just think that's a common misconception about introverts in general is that we don't like people or we don't like talking to people. And although that may be the case sometimes, I don't think it's that simple, you know? Even introverts need friends, even introverts want partners and meaningful relationships, and we want to make conversation and connect with other people. It's just under different circumstances, you know? And so if you are more introverted, if you are more timid or shy or reserved or socially anxious, I think one thing that's important to consider is the effect that all of that solitude is having on your mental and physical health, like Robert talked about in the clip. Because we all need somebody, man. I think we all need relationships, whether it's friendships, girlfriend, boyfriend, even just acquaintances. We all need social interaction on some level. And I think by stopping to consider stuff like this, topics like this, it can at least give you a bit of self awareness and maybe stop to think, okay, well, I didn't even know this was a problem, but now that I do know, how can I solve it? Right? That's what it's all about. And speaking of solutions, the last thing I want you to consider is the idea of being open and welcoming. This is the main thing I took away from the clip. Something that I knew for a long time, but just forgot, which is that a lot of people will just judge you based off of your appearance, whether it's the clothes that you're wearing or the expression on your face or the tone of your voice, your body language, your posture, all that type of stuff. People will make assumptions about you before you even speak. And one thing that I often forget to consider is how my appearance and my facial expressions and things like that, how they affect the people around me and what they might be communicating to the people around me. Because personally, I know that like if I'm looking at myself, I know that I don't have the most welcoming face. I might smile on this podcast if you're watching on YouTube or whatever. I might be positive and I might seem a bit extroverted when I'm on this podcast. That's just because I'm having fun. I love what I'm doing. But in public, I'm generally quite reserved. I'm quiet. I don't talk a lot. And I have what's a term that I can a term you may or may not know the term resting bitch face. Resting bitch face, or RBF, refers to the facial expression that some women have that makes people assume that they are a bitch, meaning that they have a bad attitude, they're rude, they're mean, they don't want to be approached. And what I'm talking about is that facial expression some women have is with like just their natural face when they are resting, just chilling, their facial expression looks bitchy or rude or arrogant or unapproachable. Doesn't mean that they're actually that way. It's just when you look at their face, you think, oh, she doesn't want people to approach her. She must be a bitch. She looks mean. She looks rude. That's a resting bitch face. Unfortunately, people look at that face and they just assume you're a bitch. Now, when it comes to men, there's a term that I use that I don't recommend you use, which is resting nigga face. And yes, nigga, Nigga, like you know the word nigga, or at least you've heard it before. What I mean when I use that term is similar to resting bitch face, but for a black man. Because a lot of people, when they think black men, they think mean, aggressive, rude, unapproachable. Generally speaking, it's a stereotype, you know? So I know that I have that type of face. I just be chilling. I could be having the best day of my life, but my face isn't communicating that. My face is communicating, leave me the fuck alone. Get out of my face. Don't talk to me, you know? Even if that's not how I feel. I realize that my face communicates that sometimes. So the reason I'm telling you that is you might not have even considered that your face and body language are telling people not to talk to you, even though you haven't verbally said, don't talk to me. You see what I'm saying? And so that's one thing I'm in the process of doing now is learning how to communicate the fact that people are welcome to talk to me, the fact that I am approachable, that I do want to make friends and talk to new people. I love making conversation, whether it's casual or deep or whatever, you know? It's about learning how to communicate those things to increase the chance that I meet people that I actually want to know. It's not about pleasing those around me. It's not about making people around me feel more comfortable in my presence, because that's not my responsibility. But if I want to make more friends, if I want to get girls, if I want to make connections and forge relationships with people, I need to show them and communicate them that I'm open to doing that. Because if I don't, they're just going to judge my appearance and make assumptions, which is natural. Doesn't make them bad people. I think that's part of human nature, is to judge based off of appearance. It's something that we all do. And so it's not about caring what other people think of our appearance. It's about tailoring our appearance to give us the highest chance of achieving the goals that we set for ourselves. And if the goal is to be more social, make more friends, make more connections, have more conversations, then we need to put ourselves in the best possible position to do that. And one of the things that will put us in that position is learning to communicate that we're open and welcoming. I'm sure you get the point by now, right? So those are 4 things I want you to consider: the difference between being alone and being lonely, and how it's really all about the connection you feel to the people or the activity. Number 2, the importance of casual encounters, how the simplest things can lead to the deepest and most meaningful of interactions or relationships. And number 3, the importance of relationships and the effect that they have on not just your mental, but your physical health. And finally, number 4, learning to be more open and welcoming to the people around you, so that if and when you do want to make connections with people, you're in the best possible position to do that because you're communicating. You want to be social as opposed to wanting to be antisocial and unapproachable, right? So that's what I got for you today, my friend. Hopefully, this has left you with some interesting things to think about. Please remember, you got to put this stuff into practice, man. Write about it in your journal. Take these talking points, elaborate on them, formulate your own thoughts and opinions. Talk about these things with friends, family, strangers on the street, people online, in the comment section, whatever you got to do. Let's start a conversation about this stuff, man, and put all of this stuff into practice. That's what the podcast is all about, my friend. But that's it for this episode of Real English Radio. I am your host, Tony Kaizen, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.